Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another top 10 video. You know, sequels are really difficult to do, but there are some that are even better than the original films, and there are some sequels that are even some of my all-time favorite movies. But today we're going to be counting down my top 10 most underrated sequels. These are not my top 10 all-time favorite sequels, these are just 10 sequels that I think are either underrated or don't quite deserve the hate that they get. So coming in at number 10, we have Space Jam: A New Legacy. The original Space Jam, of course, is a glorious relic of the 1990s, and Space Jam: A New Legacy, for whatever reason, just got royally hated on. Because overall, I actually think it's a pretty decent modern revitalization of the concept. And a lot of the complaints that people did have with it, I just didn't really understand. A lot of people complained that it was just, with Warner Brothers owned characters, and it was just, showing up to be the crowd from all different Warner Brothers movies. But again, it's like the concept is that they're in this like super tech server that has all the data from all of Warner Brothers movies, so it's not like it's just there for being their sake. And at the same time, it's like, well, you never complained about this when they did this type of thing with Ready Player One or Wreck-It Ralph or the Lego movie, and it's like, so why is it an issue now that suddenly there's all these different IP that are there? And to me, honestly, I saw it as the perfect evolution of the lesser known Looney Tunes characters that were in the background in the original Space Jam. So I really don't understand why that was a big issue for people. I thought that totally made sense for the kind of movie that this is. The scene where they're going to all of the different worlds collecting all of the Looney Tunes, I wish was a bigger part of the movie. I wish that would have gone on longer, but it totally made for a fun sequence. And having the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote in the Wasteland from Mad Max was just perfect. Overall, I think it's decent. I don't understand why people hated on it, so that's Space Jam: A New Legacy. Then at number 9, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Out of the Shadows. This, of course, was the sequel to the 2014 reboot produced by Michael Bay, and that film was one that I know many other Turtles fans had a lot of issues with, but of course it was financially successful, so they pretty much, went right into production on this film. And this is one that I think definitely got unfairly overlooked. A lot of that, I think, had to do with the fact that a lot of people just got burned by the previous movie, and I totally understand that. At the same time, as somebody who was disappointed with the previous movie, this film, in my opinion, really did a good job of fixing things and going in a better direction, and having Shredder actually be a human being, unlike the unbelievable transformer they made him into in the previous film. And then you got, Bebop and Rocksteady in there and Krang in there, and it basically feels like, the original cartoon brought to life. And then at number 8, we have Fright Night Part 2. The original Fright Night, of course, is one of those all-time great cult classic beloved movies of the 1980s. The sequel, Fright Night 2, has definitely been overlooked for a long time, and it had a lot of issues to do with distribution, so it never really got a proper release. But apparently it is going to be getting a new 4K release pretty imminently. Now the first film is absolutely the better movie, but this, as far as being, a sequel goes, I thought honestly did a really great job. The one thing that I wasn't really too big on is they kind of did this whole plot where they tried to make it seem like Charlie been made to believe that the events of the first movie weren't real, and that I think kind of could have been executed a little bit better. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. But once you get past that, there are so many other elements of this movie to like, and overall I think it's a very underrated and overlooked sequel, and hopefully now that it's going to be getting a new re-release, it will finally get some of the respect that it has been long overdue. And then at number 7, we have Superman Free. Now, I have done a full review on this movie before, so be sure to check it out if you haven't. I mean, the biggest issue, of course, being that a lot of people just complain that it's totally goofy, and I'm not saying it isn't goofy, but it's like, were the first two movies really all that serious? Because I don't think they were. But at the same time, it's a lot of people act like it doesn't have any serious elements in it at all, and it's like, did you just fall asleep during the whole period when, you know, he turns into the Dark Superman. And I don't know, I always just digged the whole vibe and plot of this one. I would never argue that it's miles better than the first, but I've always just kind of enjoyed it a bit more. At the very least, I think everybody can agree that it's better than Superman 4. And then at number 6, we have Predator 2. The original Predator, of course, is another one of those classic 80s movies. Predator 2 is definitely, I would say, not as good as the first film. And the change of setting with going from the jungle to the urban city setting, I thought was definitely really refreshing and a fun idea. And I thought Danny Glover was really great in this, and the whole ending on the ship and everything. And I just think it's a really great, fun movie. Again, it's not quite as intense or as iconic as the original, but as far as sequels go, I honestly think it's still to this day my personal favorite of all of the Predator sequels, because I just think it's a really great movie. It's got lots of great practical effects, some great, you know, action sequences. It still retains a lot of that DNA from the first film. And then at number 5, we have Sin City 2, A Dame to Kill For. The first Sin City, I think in my opinion, is like probably the greatest comic book movie of all time, simply because it really does feel like you're reading a comic book when watching it. Now, I still prefer the first film, but I absolutely think this is a very overlooked sequel, and I've never really understood why it was so overlooked. I think it probably just had a lot to do with the fact that it came out just a little bit too late after the first movie. Not quite as good as the original film, but in terms of, you know, being a format that respects the first film and continues to, you know, expand on those stories, and the fact that it plays with timelines a little bit, that you've got some stuff that takes place before the first movie and some stuff that takes after it. Personally, I kind of dig, so I think it's a really great movie, very overlooked, but not quite as good as the original. And then at number 4, we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. You know, Tobe Hooper, I think, absolutely knew that he would not be able to easily replicate what he was able to do with the first film, so it very purposely went into a more comedic route. It wasn't until recently that I noticed that this film is actually not quite as beloved in a lot of people's eyes as I had initially thought it was, or at least as much as I love it, because I think it's an absolutely terrific sequel, and I just love how completely nutty it is. And visually, I think it's just an absolutely stunning, like the production design for this movie is just great. And then at number 3, we have The Lost World Jurassic Park. Still to this day, my favorite of the Jurassic sequels. This movie just is nowhere near as beloved as the original, and I absolutely prefer the original film, but to me, The Lost World really isn't that far off. It's a very different kind of movie than the first film. It's a lot more cynical in its tone and humor, and I've never really understood like what people's issue with this one is, other than it just not being quite as good as the first movie. But again, to me, it's like it's got so many of its own memorable moments and its own DNA. But I think that over the years, as we've gotten some of the other Jurassic movies, that people have kind of looked back on this one and have kind of seen it with new eyes a little bit. And then at number 2, we have Psycho 2. The original Psycho, of course, is one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. So to attempt to do a sequel that gets anywhere close to that is quite the challenge. But Psycho 2, I think, does an absolutely magnificent job of practically being able to, you know, match the first film, but also just go in its own direction as well. And there's even some people I know who actually prefer this to the original film, and I wouldn't go quite that far, because it is a fantastic movie and it totally plays with your knowledge of the first film, with being able to conduct its own mystery of what's going on, and it very much tells its own story and it weaves its own web, but the way that it still connects with what we know in the first film and is still able to be surprising and go in a direction that you don't expect, I think is absolutely magnificent. So it's a brilliant sequel. If you've never watched it, do yourself a favor and definitely check it out, because it is probably, in my personal opinion, one of the greatest horror sequels that's ever been made. And then at number 1, we have Gremlins 2, The New Batch, a film I've talked about many times before and probably will again in the future, but it's just one of those movies that I absolutely unabashedly adore. And the original Gremlins, of course, is an iconic 80s movie, and it's difficult for me to say whether I prefer this one or not. I think that they're both practically equal with one another, but the way that this film is able to kind of be both a parody and proper sequel to the first film, I honestly think is pretty impressive. And I generally just love the whole setting and cast of characters, and I've always said that even if there were like no gremlins in this movie, it would still be just an incredibly fun, zany, entertaining film for what it is, because it just has so much going for it. And I think it's just, at the time when it came out, it was almost just a little bit too meta-y and kind of, you know, self-referential a little bit as well, that I think a lot of people just at the time weren't really sure what to make of it. But over the years now, it's gotten to the point where I feel like most people pretty much love this film just as much as the first, if not more so. But I do still see some people kind of dismissing it or not really putting it anywhere near to the original film. But to me, it's absolutely right up there. It's just a wonderful, chaotic, fun, memorable movie that just has so many great elements going for it, and is definitely, in my opinion, probably the most underrated sequel of all time. Alright guys, there you go, that was my top 10 most underrated sequels. Please feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know what your top 10 most underrated sequels will be. So until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.